Hello everyone, hope that you're doing well tonight. So my name is Cindy and I'm going to be talking with you about the Office of the Dead. Sounds kind of spooky, but it's not. Promise. So the Office of the Dead is a small prayer book that's located in the San Francisco Public Library in the Special Collections, the Richard Harrison Collection, up on the 6th floor. This particular manuscript is from Italy during the late 13th, mid 14th centuries and is written in Latin. The office is made up of psalms, scriptures, and prayers, and is part of the liturgical hours, the liturgy of the hours of the Roman Catholic Church. I'm coming down with something. This particular divine office was usually read from on All Souls Day, which typically falls around November 2nd. And its aim was to lessen the amount of time souls spent in purgatory. In the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, the office was used for personal services and wasn't part of the official liturgical cycle. Later on, towards the 14th century, it was prescribed for all clerics. So the script used is Rotunda, which is an Italian liturgical bookhand from northern Italy. Rotunda is a bit more rounded than other scripts occurring in Europe at this time and contains some distinguishing letter characteristics. Some of these can be a lack of pronounced feet on the letters, and some of them ending in an upward stroke. And some of the lowercase letters have several variations. In the M up here, that we have as an example, you can see that there's no pronounced feet, but it kind of ends. And then that last stem has a little bit of an upward stroke, and this was to help the eye sort of differentiate between letters that looked a lot alike. So if you had an M, an N, and an I all together in a row, you wouldn't know where one began and one ended if you didn't have that upward stroke. So also here in highlighted in green, it's a little hard to see, but we have two different forms of the letter R. The first one is that straight one that we're kind of used to, and then that second one has sort of a backward or two sort of shape, or a letter Z perhaps. And then in red we have two forms of the letter S, letter S. That first one looks more like a lowercase f without the perpendicular bar, and the other one, the bottom here, is definitely what we're more used to seeing. The one is kind of curved, it has more of a snake sort of shape. These also, we have a straight ascender, and then we have a sloping ascender. So biting was also a feature that was common to Rotunda, and this happens when two bowls, the bowls of two letters actually run into one another, as we have here in the BO, and the DE. They kind of just become one. Abbreviations were also common and can actually make it really hard to decipher what the text is trying to say to get a good translation of it. The abbreviation here with the letter Q with a line beneath it stands in for the word key, which is very common in this script. Abbreviations also found their way into the rubrics. As you can see here, we have three different variations of the same abbreviation, so they're completely not standardized. And all those inconsistencies like these appear throughout the text with regard to abbreviations. For the most part, the main form of the text appears to have only been written by one person, but as you can see here, just by the rubrics, we look like we have at least two different scribes working on this, so perhaps 3, maybe 4 people helped write this book. The writing support is paper, which would have been lighter and cheaper than vellum or parchment. And due to the book's small size, it would have most likely been carried, perhaps in a funeral procession, so you would have wanted it to be very light. Plus, if all clerics were required to have them, you wouldn't want them to be incredibly expensive. So during the 12th century, paper was typically used for items that were perceived to have really no lasting value in society, like a sales receipt. By the 13th century, northern Italy was the center for paper production, and they exported it throughout Europe. This paper in the office has a regular undulating watermark, and it has some sparsely interwoven color fibers, mostly green, blue, and red. The codex itself consists of 7 quires with 5 folios each, giving us a total of 70 pages. Catchwords were used in the office to assist in the proper arrangement of quires by the binder. The catchwords appear at the end of the folio and consist of the first word to appear at the beginning of the following folio. However, this does not happen with regard to the office. The word occurrences do not correspond, telling us that the manuscript has been rebound at least once and is incomplete, or it's in a completely wrong order. Italian scribes were fond of placing their catchwords near the bottom of the page and centered between the margins, as we see in this example here. The office is also leather-bound and contains no boards. This probably would have made it lighter for carrying and transport as well. The ink used for the main text is most likely a metal gall ink. Metal gall inks used varying amounts of various sulfides and iron vitriol and oak galls combined with either vinegar, water, or wine. The black color of the metal gall ink was derived from a chemical reaction between the metal and the tannic acids that were found in the galls. However, the black color can sometimes begin to fade to a brownish or yellowish hue over the centuries. This is dependent on the storage of the manuscript over the years. And here we can see in this example how it's begun to kind of fade in places to that yellowish color, and some places seem to kind of retain that black, but this particular page was pretty faded. Pigmented inks, such as the reds used in the rubrics, were created by grinding colored minerals like cinnabar or mercuric sulfide, both found in parts of Spain. The blues, which was the second most common pigment found in medieval manuscripts after red, was commonly derived from a stone azurite found throughout Europe. However, the most prized blue came from lapis lazuli, which was imported from the region of Afghanistan. Blue was so precious that they would actually recycle it from other manuscripts or paintings and scrape it off and then reconstitute it so they could use it again. The illuminations in the text, somebody earlier used the word utilitarian, and this text is very utilitarian. It's not embellished a whole lot. It's very sort of sparse, but it gets its point across. The illuminations are only that of gold leafing of significant letters within the text. They usually begin at the beginning of a psalm or scripture or prayer, or at the beginning of a new section of the office. The illuminator applied the gold leafing to gesso, which is a chalk or plaster-based substance bound by either honey or resin and applied with either a brush or a pen. The gesso was used to actually raise the surface of the writing support in order to give the leafing a more three-dimensional feel. And you can see in this picture that I posted here that the light is touching the leafing in a way that you can tell that it's actually lifting off the page. So the decorations occur as spidery pen lines ornamenting prominent letters. And you see the U over here has all this lovely little spidery pen work here. Important capitals appearing at the beginning of a line that were not gilded were done in blue inks, and decorated with red penwork. Gilded letters alternate between blue and red penwork. In addition, gilded and blue letters alternate. And somebody else had a text that was like this. I think it was Devin's book. Was very similar to how the back and forth between the blue and the gold of the lettering here. This was maybe a cost-saving device. It could have been a stylistic choice. I'm not sure, but judging from what I've learned about this and how each cleric was required to have one later on, and if this text is from that era, then it would probably make it less expensive so they could reproduce them more quickly. So, pardon me, my throat. The rubrics in the text stand in for titles of particular prayers or chapters, along with directions the priest was to give or take, such as standing or sitting, or whether to read aloud or silently. So was believed that the memorization and recitation of the office would mitigate its importance. So it was always to be read from and never memorized. And the person reading it was always to have their lips moving regardless of whether or not the section was to be read aloud or silently. So it was actually part of the ritual to always have your lips moving when administering the office. So medieval Italy was a pretty hairy place. At times it was filled with a lot of violence and dangers. Vendettas, which were a type of retribution doled out by nobles for harm inflicted against one of their family members, was considered to have harmed the whole of their family and caused a lot of violence in the streets. Kind of reminds me of like Romeo and Juliet with this family feud going on. In most cases, a vendetta was actually carried out on the same day of the year and in the exact manner of the original act of violence. So we're talking about an entire area of people who really knew how to hold on to a grudge. Before the onslaught of the Black Death in 1349, poor sanitation and malnutrition were the catalyst of most of the illnesses. It was most common infection. The most common of these were infections such as dysentery or influenza. Sexually transmitted diseases were also really high, and St. Anthony's fire, which was a bacterial infection caused by grain mold, usually on rye, which could cause hallucinations, fever, all kinds of stuff. Discussions at this time within the Catholic Church began to change and increase with the concern of the idea of purgatory as being an actual physical location and less of a state of being after death that souls were sent to. As this thought really began to solidify within the Church, unease for those souls awaiting entrance into heaven began to rise, and the Church began to reserve an increasing amount of time in the prayer service for the souls of the departed, placing the office of the dead at the center of their salvation. So although it's a really small and unassuming codex, it would have been held in incredibly high regard to those of the Catholic faith during this time period. It was the responsibility of the living to look after the souls of the dead and assist them in reaching heaven. So that is my presentation. I hope I didn't talk too quickly. I tried to keep it slow. So thank you so much, and I will pass it on.